Hello everyone. So we're on to week 3. So this time we're looking at, well, we know how they treated them because we know what caused their illness. So this is more about who and where they would be cared for. So we're going to look at that same thing again across the 4 time periods. How would they be cared for? So let's start off. So if you were sick during the Middle Ages and you had enough money, you'd be cared for by a physician. Now, a physician would tend to consult urine charts, consult astrological information. They might even refer to, as we've looked at, the 4 humours and diagnose your illness based on that. They would then send you to the apothecary or a barber surgeon to gain treatment. And by 1340, they actually needed a licence to be able to practice their medicine. An apothecarist is a bit like a pharmacy now. They had no medical qualifications, but they would have lots of ingredients to produce medicines and ointments. So they might say, "Oh, you're not feeling very well. Why don't you take this mixture of lemon and honey that I've made?" So they make you something up. They don't have any formal training, but they're much cheaper. And because of that, they were quite popular. Now, barber surgeons, they were often responsible for very basic surgery. And that's why their pole has got white and red on it, the little pole that's outside the barber surgeon shop. And they would tend to practice things like bloodletting, lancing boils, or pulling out your teeth. And they were quite cheap, but people would tend to try to avoid going to a barber surgeon if they could, because they're very painful and not very pleasant experiences. So barbers would do that because they had the sharpest knives for cutting hair. They'd have very sharp razors. You'd also have housewives, and they'd have a reputation as a wise woman. So midwife literally means wise woman. And they would make traditional recipes, which were remedies really. So they'd know how to deal with broken bones, they'd know how to deal with childbirth, they'd know what to do with burns or with different issues that people might have. So people would often be cared for by women in their village. And that is why later on some of them were accused of witchcraft. Many people would actually go to church, and they'd go to church either as a pilgrimage or as a shrine to pray. So in Walsingham in Norfolk, there's a very famous church which was apparently the Church of Our Lady. It's about Mary, and that apparently would heal you of lots of your issues. So some people would go to churches. Finally, hospitals were used as a place to treat the sick, but the hospitals were nothing like modern hospitals. They were run by monks and nuns, and they were usually for specific illnesses. So they might be for leprosy, or it might be for diphtheria or something. The idea was, though, that you were being cared for, not cured. So they were care, not cure. Now, St. Bartholomew's was quite a small hospital. It just had 12 beds. And once you were better, they'd turn you away. But people did get better just because they got good food, they were very hygienic, and they were being given much better food than they'd have at home. So although some people died in these hospitals, most actually had quite a pleasant experience, but it only added fuel to the idea that God was the one making you ill. So it didn't really get much better. Right, let's go into the Renaissance. So just like before, physicians were still diagnosing the sick, but they were beginning to question the ideas put forward by Galen. And often they were reading new books by Vesalius or Harvey or Sydenham, and they were sharing the ideas of the Royal Society. So we get to see some progress in the way that physicians are beginning to challenge Galen's ideas, but it's only tiny steps. We also see apothecaries becoming apprenticeships where they'd mix up their herbal remedies. So in Romeo and Juliet, for example, Romeo goes to the apothecarist to get himself some, or is it Juliet? Goes to the apothecarist to get some poison so that she can kill herself. She gets that from the apothecarist. We still use barber surgeons, and they still continue to carry out minor surgical operations like amputations, like caesareans, like gallbladder removals. And we also see housewives beginning to treat medicine, but many are branded as witches. And in the 1640s, many of them are murdered. So in the 1640s, many of these women who are trying to treat the sick are murdered because they don't have a license. The church continues to be important, but because Henry VIII and the Act of Supremacy, the Reformation, the break from Rome, where they create the Church of England, monasteries close. Now that's important. Monasteries closing means that people can't go to monasteries for treatment. So we get some progress, we get some new things happening. We get people are beginning to being treated by nurses. But these women at this point aren't very well trained, nor are they very well paid, and they often provide quite poor standards of care. We also see the first private hospitals, which are charity hospitals run by local governments. So often they were quite unpleasant places. Some were voluntary hospitals, some were private hospitals. And we also get, because of the Reformation, the church is less powerful in the running of hospitals. Now, that is a negative because churches were very clean. These new hospitals are very, very dirty. So actually, care goes backwards because cleanliness gets worse. So cleanliness is next to godliness. These churches are further away from the church, they're further away from being clean. So the churches are dirtier in the Renaissance than the Middle Ages, which is surprising. Right, let's go on to the industrial period. So during the industrial period, think of all those factories, all those things going on. We still get people going to housewives for basic medical care. We still see apothecaries, but they're increasingly trained and they have to go and have training before they can become pharmacists. So just like now, we'd have pharmacists providing drugs, but think about this. Pharmacies would be dispensing those magic bullets, so they weren't always that well trained and there wasn't enough regulation. We also see, for the first time, professional surgeons who are actually having to pass exams to be able to conduct surgery. And later we then find operating theatres, where people would learn the art of surgery through watching it in a literal theatre. So people would learn it by watching it take place. A bit like how people used to watch Vesalius's dissections. We've also got Florence Nightingale. Now, during the Crimean War, she made an enormous difference to the cleanliness of hospitals. The death rate reduced from 42% to 2%. And she wrote a very famous book called Notes on Nursing, which encouraged cleanliness. Now, on returning to England, she wrote an 800-page report to Queen Victoria, and in 1860 she established the Nightingale School for Nurses. So nurses were going to be much better trained, and they were going to be better at looking after people. In 1859, she wrote Notes on Nursing, which talked about design of hospitals. Things like floors should be made of materials that are easy to clean, whereas before they'd been made of wood. So really sensible things. And finally, people were now being treated in private hospitals, voluntary hospitals, local government hospitals, or, if you were very poor, the workhouse. So still there is a difference where you're being treated based on how much money you have. Overall though, the standards of care and hygiene is beginning to, thanks to Florence Nightingale, thanks to people like Semmelweis, beginning to improve. Right, let's move into the modern era. So in the modern era, we see that housewives still dominate treatment before 1948. So people before 1948 are going to people in their village, people they know, who they've seen give some treatments. But we now have very well trained pharmacists who can give out medicines. And apparently every pharmacy in England should have a resident snake expert just in case you get bitten. Nursing is now incredibly well trained, and you need a degree to be a nurse, so you have to go to university. And if you see a professional physiotherapist, you may also be able to help you with muscular injuries. And actually, this dates back all the way to Hippocrates and Galen. But this is the big one. The NHS has been created. So physicians are now known as general practitioners, or GPs. So in 1948, the NHS is created. And we all can gain free healthcare because of it. We have specialist surgeons for brains, for hearts, for children, for all sorts. And patients are treated in a variety of hospitals. Now, the government has done a lot of stuff in the 20th century to improve health. The government passed the National Insurance Act, which means every month a certain amount of your money goes into a big pot, and if you lose your job, that helps to pay for your money when you lose your job. National insurance. And in 1948, we get the National Health Service. which provides free healthcare at the point of need. And it's meant that you can go in, you can be treated for as many conditions as you've got for free. Many see this as Britain's best achievement, and it was passed by Clement Attlee's government, which is ATTLEE, in the first ever Labour majority. We've now got specialist equipment like ambulances. We've got air ambulances, we've got motorised ambulances, and we've got specialist hospitals like one in Sheffield for hearts. There's a Hull one which is particularly good for people's eyes. So all over the country we've got specialist places where people can receive the best possible care. Even think, during the COVID pandemic, they built a new hospital just in case there were too many people to fit inside the hospitals from COVID. So, I hope you found that one useful. That was all about how the care of the sick has improved.